In today's video I'm going to be talking about 3 of my favorite vintage lenses to use when it comes to making videos and taking pictures. So I started using vintage lenses not that long ago actually. I must say that I was hooked from day one and blown away by the type of footage that came from these vintage lenses. Now of course it took me quite a while to get used to these vintage lenses and also to figure them out, since each of these lenses has their own quirks and characteristics. But like all good things, this does take some time to get the hang of. So the first vintage lens that I actually started out with was the Canon 50mm f1.8 FD vintage lens. And what I love about this lens is the sharpness and quality of bokeh when shooting with it. For me, the Canon 50mm f1.8 FD vintage lens is still the king of bokeh. And now I know it's still not the sharpest lens that you can buy, but just have a look at the footage that I took using this lens. And I mean all of this for only $65. This lens is also built really well and the quality of optics inside still holds up really good till this day. The only real issue that I have with this lens is that the aperture ring is not so smooth when twisting it. But it's barely noticeable and it will never stop me from using this amazing lens. Now something to keep in mind when shooting with vintage lenses on APS-C sensor cameras is that your field of view will change. Since my Sony has a crop factor of 1.5, this 50mm lens will actually now give me a 75mm field of view. So I wouldn't recommend this lens if you are looking for a wide angle lens. Where this lens shines is when you're looking for some nice close-up shots or if you're going for a tighter look, if that's even a thing. This lens won't be my first choice when it comes to making travel videos since it's not that wide. Maybe if you're shooting on a full frame camera, but then you will still be locked into a 50mm field of view. And you might struggle to get some beautiful wide landscape scenes. But don't leave this lens at home when you are traveling. You can still achieve some epic footage when using this lens. I guess it's just going to depend on what you are shooting or what you're actually looking for. So overall, when it comes to vintage lenses, this one will fall into my number 2 spot. Now moving on to my third favorite vintage lens, and honestly this lens does come in handy for me from time to time. The lens that I'm talking about is the Canon 200mm f4 FD prime vintage lens. And this lens actually took me by surprise. I was really interested to see if this lens would fit my style, and I must say it does from time to time. Again, it's just gonna depend on what you are actually shooting. Now again, when shooting with a 200mm lens on an APS-C sensor, your field of view will change to 300mm. So it's getting really tight and zoomed in, as you can see from the footage. This lens is tricky to shoot when on f4, and I would recommend to open it up to at least f11 to get some better focus, since some of the objects that you are going to be shooting are going to be much further away. So you should definitely take advantage of your camera's focus peaking if it has that, since the LED displays on Sony cameras are not the best in 4K mode. Shooting an f4 on this lens will work, it's just that you would really need to nail your focus. Otherwise your footage will be completely useless, so let me show you actually what I'm talking about here. So as you can see, when shooting on f4 you do get a nice looking bokeh, but the image tends to look a bit softer now. And trying to stay in focus is also going to be much more difficult for you now. Now I'm just going to switch to f11, and as you can see, much more of the image is in focus and it's actually looking quite sharper now. This lens will definitely stay at home while I'm traveling, but it still comes in handy from time to time. The 200mm vintage lens is quite heavy, but it's really well built. The optics could be better, but again, I think you can pick this lens up for only $80. Now that's not a bad price. I would recommend this lens more for photography work, since this is where this lens really shines. Especially if you're more into portrait photography and looking to save a bit of money. So let's have a look at some of the photos I took with the 200mm FD lens and compare them to some of the photos I took while using the 50mm FD vintage lens. And let me know which one you guys prefer down below in the comments. Now on to my absolute favorite vintage lens to use when it comes to making videos and taking pictures. The Vivitar 28mm f2.8 vintage lens. From day one I knew that this lens was going to be my favorite vintage lens. The lens is built well, it's small and compact, and the optics are great. The colors you get when shooting with this lens is pure beauty. This is not the fastest or sharpest lens out there, but it sure does get the job done for me. The balance between contrast and sharpness is also really great. When fully opened you will get great looking bokeh. And when dialing the aperture to f11 the sharpness really kicks in. Why I love this lens so much is because it's really versatile. It fits my shooting needs perfectly and it's always my go-to lens when it comes to travel footage and photography. What makes this lens so great when it comes to traveling is that it's wide enough to get really great landscapes, and you can also get some really nice close-ups when using this lens. Now again, when shooting with this 28mm lens on an APS-C sensor, your field of view will change to 42mm. And to work this out, you simply have to take 1.5 times 28 and there you have it, 42mm field of view. But the crop factor will differ from sensor to sensor since the Sony has a crop factor of 1.5. When using the Vivitar 28mm lens, it's easy to pull focus even when it's wide open. The only negative that I have with this lens is that it gets a bit soft on the edges when you're shooting wide open. But when you're shooting on f5.6, the sharpness does increase. This lens would set you back around $45, and in my books that's a steal for the type of quality that you're getting from this lens. So let's go have a look at some of the photos and video footage that I took while using the Vivitar 28mm vintage lens. As you can see, the footage looks great, and this is also a perfect lens for photography while on a budget. Now attaching these lenses to your camera is really quick and easy. I use a simple K&F lens adapter and it has been working really great for me. The adapter only cost me $35, so again it's good for the budget. One thing that you would need to consider when shooting with these vintage lenses is that you won't have any autofocus or stabilization. But you do get some adapters that will give you autofocus, but I just don't have one of those yet. So there you have it. I hope that this video has helped you out when it comes to choosing the correct vintage lenses when shooting videos. But also remember, these are just my opinions and what's right for me might not be right for you. So remember to hit that like and subscribe button if you like this video, and also please leave your comments down below. Also remember, stay creative.